My God, how can this be happening now? David Wellington's voice cracked as he slammed his phone down, his hands trembling like a man facing financial ruin. The billionaire CEO of Wellington Industries stood frozen at his 45th floor window, watching three black Mercedes pull up to his building's entrance. Inside those cars sat executives from China's largest technology conglomerate, men who controlled a $200 million contract that could make or break his empire. His translator had just canceled. 15 minutes. That's all the time he had left before the most important meeting of his life, and he couldn't speak a word of Mandarin. His empire was about to crumble because of a language barrier, until a quiet voice from the corner of his office changed everything. "Excuse me, Mr. Wellington, but I speak fluent Mandarin." Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow, at the same time, we'll bring you another story of black people leading the way that you won't want to miss. The words hit David Wellington like a physical blow. His official translator, the man he'd paid $5,000 just to be on standby, had just delivered the worst news possible. "Family emergency, Mr. Wellington. My father's in the hospital. I can't make it." David stared at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan office, watching the Chinese delegation emerge from their vehicles 45 floors below. These weren't just any business partners. Li Wei and his team from Dragon Technology represented the largest tech manufacturing deal in Wellington Industries' 20-year history. $200 million. Enough to expand his company globally, or, if this meeting went wrong, enough to destroy everything he'd built. "Rebecca," he barked at his executive assistant, who was already frantically dialing numbers on her phone. "Tell me you found someone." Rebecca's face had gone pale. "Sir, I've called every translation service in the city. The Chinese delegation specifically requested someone with expertise in technical manufacturing terminology. On 15 minutes' notice, it's impossible." David's Italian silk tie felt like a noose around his neck. He'd spent months preparing for this moment. The Chinese were notorious for their precision, their cultural protocols, their absolute intolerance for miscommunication. They'd walked away from billion-dollar deals over far less than a language barrier. Through his office speakers, he heard the elevator ding on his floor. They were here. "Mr. Wellington," Rebecca's voice was barely above a whisper. "What do we do?" David's mind raced through impossible scenarios. Google Translate? Insulting. Hand gestures. Humiliating. Postponing? Corporate suicide. Li Wei had flown 16 hours specifically for this meeting. Chinese business culture demanded respect, precision, and above all, seamless communication. The soft knock on his office door felt like a death knell. But then, from the corner of his office where he'd barely noticed someone quietly emptying his trash bin, came a voice that would change everything. "Excuse me, Mr. Wellington, but I speak fluent Mandarin." David spun around so fast he nearly knocked over his coffee. Standing by his desk, wearing a simple janitor's uniform with Marcus embroidered on the pocket, was a man he'd seen cleaning his office for years, but had never really noticed. Marcus Thompson, the night janitor, stood calmly with a slight smile, as if he'd just offered to water the plants. "What did you just say?" David's voice came out as a croak. Marcus Thompson had been invisible for 15 years. Every night, he cleaned the offices of Wellington Industries' executive floor, emptying trash cans, mopping floors, and listening to the conversations of powerful men who spoke as if he didn't exist. But tonight, everything changed. "I said I speak fluent Mandarin, Mr. Wellington," Marcus repeated, his voice steady and calm. "I couldn't help but overhear your situation." David's world tilted. This was the same man who'd silently cleaned his office for years, whose presence he'd acknowledged with nothing more than an occasional nod. Now this janitor was claiming to speak one of the world's most complex languages. "You're telling me," David said slowly, his voice dripping with disbelief, "that you, a janitor, speak fluent Mandarin Chinese?" Marcus didn't flinch at the tone. "I have a master's degree in international business from Columbia University and spent 8 years working in Beijing before returning to New York. I'm also fluent in Cantonese and have extensive experience in technology manufacturing negotiations." The words hit David like a freight train. Rebecca's jaw dropped. The cleaning cart stood as evidence of a reality that suddenly made no sense. "Then why?" David gestured at the janitor's uniform. unable to finish the question. Why am I cleaning your office? Marcus smiled sadly. Because 15 years ago, no one would hire a black man with a Chinese language specialty. Every firm told me I wasn't the right fit for their international division. So I took the only job I could find and kept my skills sharp by listening to your business calls with international partners. The knock on David's door came again, more insistent this time. Mr. Wellington, Rebecca's voice was urgent. Lu Wei is asking for you personally. David's empire hung in the balance. Every instinct screamed against trusting his company's future to a janitor. But as he looked at Marcus Thompson, really looked at him for the first time, he saw something he'd missed for 15 years. Confidence, intelligence, and an unshakable calm that comes from true competence. Marcus, David said, his voice barely steady, if I trust you with this meeting, and you're lying to me, I lose everything. Marcus met his gaze without wavering. Mr. Wellington, I've been listening to your conversations for 15 years. I know this deal better than anyone else in this building. The question is, are you desperate enough to let me save your company? The door opened, and Li Wei stepped inside, his eyes immediately scanning the room with the sharp assessment of a man who'd built an empire on reading people and situations. Li Wei entered the room with the presence of a man who commanded respect across continents. His perfectly tailored suit, measured steps, and calculating gaze took in every detail of Wellington's office. Behind him, 3 other executives filed in, their faces expressions of polite professionalism masking the serious business at hand. Mr. Wellington, Li Wei said in accented English, extending his hand. We meet at last. David's heart pounded as he shook the man's hand, acutely aware that his entire future hung on the next few minutes. Mr. Li, welcome to Wellington Industries. I'm honored to have you here. Li Wei's eyes immediately went to Marcus, who stood quietly by the window, still in his janitor's uniform. The Chinese executive's brow furrowed slightly, a reaction David had feared. Before we begin, Li Wei said carefully, I must ask about the translation arrangements. Your email confirmed a certified interpreter would be present. David's throat went dry. This was it. The moment of truth. Mr. Li, David said, his voice surprisingly steady, I'd like you to meet Marcus Thompson. He'll be handling our translation needs today. Li Wei's gaze sharpened as he looked at Marcus, taking in the janitor's uniform with obvious confusion. One of his executives whispered something in rapid Mandarin, and David caught a tone of skepticism. Marcus stepped forward and, to David's amazement, bowed slightly in the traditional Chinese manner. Then he spoke, his voice transforming completely as fluent Mandarin flowed from his lips with the precision of a native speaker. The change in the room was electric. Li Wei's eyes widened, and he responded immediately in Mandarin, his voice carrying a tone of surprise and growing respect. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Marcus responding to increasingly complex questions about business terminology, cultural protocols, and technical manufacturing specifications. Finally, Li Wei turned to David, his expression completely transformed. Mr. Wellington, he said in English, your translator is quite impressive. He not only speaks perfect Mandarin, but understands the intricacies of our business culture better than most Americans I've encountered. However, Li Wei paused, his eyes returning to Marcus's janitor uniform. I must ask, why is such a skilled professional working as a janitor in your building? David felt sweat beading on his forehead. How could he explain 15 years of overlooking the very talent that was now saving his company? Marcus stepped forward again, speaking directly to Li Wei in Mandarin. Whatever he said caused the Chinese executive's expression to shift from curiosity to something deeper understanding. Perhaps even respect. Li Wei nodded slowly, then addressed David again. Mr. Thompson has explained the situation. He tells me that sometimes the most valuable people are hidden in plain sight, and that true worth isn't always recognized immediately. David realized he was witnessing something extraordinary, a janitor commanding the respect of one of China's most powerful businessmen, while he, the billionaire CEO, stood on the sidelines of his own meeting. The conference room transformed into Marcus Thompson's domain. As the Chinese delegation settled around the mahogany table, Marcus shed his janitor's cart like a snake, shedding its skin. He moved with the confident grace of a man who'd finally found his element, speaking with Li Wei and his team in rapid, fluid Mandarin that flowed like poetry. David watched in stunned silence as Marcus effortlessly navigated complex technical discussions about semiconductor manufacturing, supply chain logistics, and international trade regulations. The man he'd seen emptying trash cans for 15 years was now dissecting profit margins and discussing manufacturing timelines with the expertise of a seasoned executive. "Marcus is explaining our production capabilities," David whispered to Rebecca, who was frantically taking notes despite understanding nothing of the conversation. But Marcus heard him. Without breaking stride in his Mandarin conversation, he turned to David and said in English, "Actually, Mr. Wellington, I'm correcting some misconceptions about our manufacturing capacity. Li Wei's team believes we can only handle 50,000 units per month. But I know from your previous calls that we've expanded to 75,000. Li Wei's eyebrows raised, and he spoke directly to Marcus in Mandarin. Marcus responded, gesturing toward David with obvious respect, while continuing the explanation. "What's he saying?" David asked, feeling like a stranger in his own company. "He's asking why I know more about your company's capabilities than you do," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm explaining that I've had the privilege of observing your business operations from a unique perspective for many years." Li Wei laughed, actually laughed, and said something that made his entire team smile. Marcus translated. "He says that in China they have a saying, 'The wisest man in the room is often the one who speaks last.' He's impressed that you've kept such a valuable advisor so close, even if his official title doesn't reflect his true worth." David's face burned with embarrassment and shame. Here was Li Wei, praising him for wisdom he'd never possessed, while the man who was actually saving his company had been invisible to him for 15 years. The meeting continued for 2 hours, with Marcus seamlessly translating complex negotiations, cultural nuances, and technical specifications. He caught misunderstandings before they became problems, suggested compromises that satisfied both sides, and demonstrated an understanding of Chinese business culture that impressed even Li Wei. Finally, as the formal negotiations concluded, Li Wei stood and spoke directly to Marcus in Mandarin for several minutes. Marcus responded with obvious humility. But Li Wei persisted, his tone becoming more insistent. "What's he saying?" David asked. Marcus hesitated. He's offering me a position as Director of International Relations for Dragon Technology. He says my skills are wasted in my current role." The words hit David like a physical blow. He was about to lose the man who just saved his company, and he was about to lose him to the very people Marcus had helped him secure a deal with. Li Wei turned to David, his expression serious. "Mr. Wellington, I must be honest with you. Marcus Thompson is perhaps the most skilled interpreter and cultural liaison I've encountered in 20 years of international business. If you don't recognize his value, I certainly will." David stared at Marcus, seeing him clearly for the first time in 15 years. The janitor's uniform couldn't hide the dignity, intelligence, and quiet strength that had always been there. David had been blind to it all, and now he was about to pay the ultimate price for his blindness. The conference room fell silent as Li Wei's ultimatum hung in the air. David Wellington, a man who'd built an empire on decisive action, found himself paralyzed by the weight of his own failure. For 15 years, he'd walked past Marcus Thompson, seeing only a janitor, never recognizing the brilliant mind that had just saved his company. Marcus stood quietly, his dignity intact despite the awkward position he'd been placed in. He hadn't asked for this moment, hadn't sought recognition or advancement. He'd simply stepped forward when someone needed help, the same way he'd probably been doing his entire life. "Mr. Li," David said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of dawning realization, "you're absolutely right. Marcus Thompson is extraordinary, and I've been blind to it." He turned to Marcus, his eyes filled with something that looked like genuine remorse. "Marcus, I owe you an apology that's 15 years overdue." Marcus met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Wellington, I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Li Wei watched this exchange with the keen interest of a man who'd spent decades reading people and situations. He spoke to Marcus in Mandarin, and Marcus responded with obvious respect but also something else, loyalty. "What did he say?" David asked. "He asked if I was happy working for you," Marcus replied. I told him that loyalty isn't about being happy with your situation. It's about being faithful to your principles, even when no one notices. Li Wei nodded approvingly and turned back to David. Mr. Wellington, you have a choice to make. You can continue to let this man's talents go to waste, or you can recognize what's been in front of you all along. But I won't make my decision about our business relationship until I see how you handle this moment. David felt the weight of the $200 million contract, balanced against something even more valuable: his integrity as a leader. The Chinese delegation watched him with the quiet intensity of people who understood that character is revealed in moments of crisis. Marcus, David said, his voice stronger now, I want to offer you the position of Vice President of International Relations, effective immediately. Your salary will be $250,000 to start, with full benefits, stock options, and a corner office on this floor. Marcus's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he spoke to Li Wei in Mandarin. Li Wei responded, and a brief but intense conversation followed. What's happening? Rebecca whispered to David. Li Wei stood up, his expression serious. Mr. Thompson has just demonstrated something remarkable. I offered him a position with my company that would pay him $400,000 annually, plus benefits that would set him up for life. He turned me down. David's heart stopped. He turned you down? Yes, Li Wei continued. He said that you gave him employment when no one else would, and that loyalty isn't something you abandon when a better offer comes along. He said that sometimes the best way to change a company is from the inside, with patience and integrity. Marcus looked at David with quiet dignity. Mr. Wellington, I appreciate your offer, but I need to know that it's genuine. I need to know that you're not just promoting me because Li Wei is watching, but because you finally see the value in people you've overlooked. The moment stretched between them, 15 years of invisible service hanging in the balance. David realized that this wasn't just about a promotion or a business deal. This was about the kind of leader he wanted to be, the kind of company he wanted to run, and the kind of man he wanted to become. David Wellington stared at Marcus Thompson and saw his own reflection in the man's eyes. Not the reflection of a successful CEO, but of a man who'd been living with blinders on for 15 years. The weight of that realization settled on his shoulders like a heavy coat. Marcus, David said, his voice carrying a conviction he hadn't felt in years. You're right to question my motives. For 15 years I've walked past you every day, and I never saw you. Really saw you. I saw a janitor's uniform and made assumptions about the person wearing it. That's not just poor leadership. That's a failure of basic human decency. Li Wei watched this unfold with the attention of a man who'd spent decades studying character. His three executives exchanged glances, clearly understanding that they were witnessing something significant. David continued, I'm not offering you this position because of Li Wei's ultimatum. I'm offering it because you've just shown me what real leadership looks like. You had every right to walk away with Li Wei's offer, to leave me to face the consequences of my own blindness. Instead, you chose loyalty, not to me, but to something bigger than both of us. Marcus nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Mr. Wellington, I've spent 15 years watching you build this company. I've seen you make difficult decisions, fight for your employees' jobs during recessions, and treat your business partners with respect. You're not a bad man. You're just a man who got caught up in the systems that keep people invisible. The systems I helped create, David admitted. Marcus, if you accept this position, I want you to help me change those systems. I want you to help me see what else I've been missing. Li Wei spoke to Marcus in Mandarin, and Marcus responded with obvious emotion. Li Wei nodded and turned to David. Mr. Thompson just told me something interesting, Li Wei said. He said that in his years of listening to your business calls, he's identified at least 6 other employees in your company who have skills and insights that could benefit your international expansion. People whose talents have been overlooked because of their job titles, their backgrounds, or their appearance. David felt a chill of recognition. Marcus, is that true? Yes, sir. There's Maria in accounting, who speaks fluent Portuguese and has insights into the Brazilian market. There's James in maintenance, who has an engineering degree and has been quietly fixing problems that your technical team hasn't even noticed. And there's Sarah, in the cafeteria, who has an MBA and has been developing ideas for employee retention that could save you millions. Rebecca was frantically taking notes, her eyes wide with the implications of what she was hearing. Lei Wei smiled, the first genuine smile David had seen from him all day. Mr. Wellington, I came here to evaluate a business partnership. What I've found is much more valuable, a company that's on the verge of discovering its own hidden potential. David looked around the room at the Chinese executives, at Rebecca, at Marcus, and finally at his own reflection in the conference room window. Marcus, I accept your conditions. I want you to help me build a company that sees people really sees them. I want you to help me identify every overlooked talent in this organization. Marcus extended his hand, and David shook it with the respect of one equal greeting another. Mr. Wellington, I think we're about to build something remarkable together. Li Wei spoke to his team in Mandarin, and they all nodded approvingly. Then he turned to David with a broad smile. Mr. Wellington, Dragon Technology is proud to partner with a company that values hidden talent. Consider our $200 million contract signed. But as the Chinese delegation gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Li Wei had one final observation that would change everything. Mr. Wellington, I must tell you something. This wasn't just a business meeting, it was a test. The conference room went silent as Li Wei's words hung in the air. David felt his stomach drop, the familiar sensation of a businessman realizing he'd been played. A test? Li Wei nodded, his expression serious but not unkind. 3 months ago, Dragon Technology hired a consulting firm to evaluate potential American partners. They spent weeks researching your company, your competitors, your leadership style. What they found was concerning. David's hands gripped the edge of the table. After everything they'd been through, after Marcus had saved the deal, was Li Wei about to walk away? They discovered that Wellington Industries, despite its impressive financial performance, had a significant blind spot when it came to human capital. Brilliant minds working in positions far below their capabilities, talents going unrecognized, potential leaders being overlooked. Li Wei's gaze moved between David and Marcus. We needed to know if you were the kind of leader who could recognize and develop that hidden potential. Marcus spoke up, his voice steady but curious. So you knew about the translator cancellation? Li Wei smiled. Our consulting firm discovered that your regular translator was Marcus Thompson's former classmate from Columbia. They approached him about creating a scenario that would test Mr. Wellington's character and judgment under pressure. David's mind reeled. You orchestrated this entire situation? Not orchestrated, Li Wei corrected. We simply created an opportunity for truth to emerge. We knew about Marcus's background, his qualifications, his years of invisible service. What we didn't know was whether you would recognize his value when it mattered most. Rebecca looked between them, confused. But Marcus didn't know about the test, did he? No, Li Wei confirmed. Marcus's actions today were completely genuine. His loyalty, his competence, his decision to help rather than exploit the situation. Those were all real. That's what made this test so valuable. David looked at Marcus with new understanding. You stepped forward not knowing this was a setup. You risked everything to help me, even after 15 years of being invisible. Marcus met his gaze steadily. Mr. Wellington, character isn't about what you do when you know you're being tested. It's about what you do when you think nobody's watching. Li Wei stood, his expression now one of genuine respect. Gentlemen, Dragon Technology has been looking for an American partner for 5 years. We've walked away from dozens of deals. Not because the companies weren't profitable, but because their leaders couldn't see the potential in their own people. Today, we saw something different. He turned to David. Mr. Wellington, you admitted your failures, recognized talent when it was revealed, and chose to change rather than defend your past blindness. That's the kind of leadership we want to partner with. Then he turned to Marcus. Mr. Thompson, your loyalty and competence under pressure impressed us greatly. Dragon Technology would still be honored to have you join our team, but we're equally pleased to see you helping to transform Wellington Industries from within. David felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, not just the weight of the contract, but the weight of years of missed opportunities and unrecognized potential. Marcus, I meant what I said earlier. I want your help identifying every overlooked talent in this company. Marcus nodded, then smiled for the first time all day. Mr. Wellington, I think we're going to discover that Wellington Industries has been sitting on a goldmine of untapped potential. Starting tomorrow, we're going to see this company with completely new eyes. Liwei gathered his materials, then paused at the door. Mr. Wellington, there's one more thing. The consulting firm that researched your company? They're owned by Dragon Technology. We'd like them to work with you and Marcus to conduct a complete talent assessment of your organization. Consider it our first joint project. As the Chinese delegation filed out, David and Marcus stood alone in the conference room, the weight of transformation settling around them. Marcus, David said quietly, I owe you more than a promotion. I owe you an apology for 15 years of blindness. Marcus looked out the window at the city below, then back at David. Mr. Wellington, sometimes the best apology is change. Help me transform this company, and we'll call it even. David extended his hand once more, and as Marcus shook it, both men knew they were shaking hands, not just as employer and employee, but as partners in building something remarkable. A company that truly saw its people. Outside the conference room, Rebecca was already making calls, starting the process of identifying the hidden talents that had been walking the halls of Wellington Industries for years, waiting to be discovered. The janitor had become the catalyst for transformation, proving that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone overlooks, until the moment arrives when their true worth can no longer be hidden.